Okay, this is, I had to touch my face, apparently. Brain was like, touch that face, you're about to start a video. So I wanted to just record my own thoughts on this. Everyone has stopped reading, and this is based off of that. I think it was on Reddit. There was a post where some college kid or some teacher, professor, I think it was a professor of college kids, was saying that kids these days don't even read anymore, or they're shocked when it comes to reading a book as their assignment. And I wanted to just add my 2 cents because being a famous reader and learned person, intellectual in the YouTube space, with my massive following, I thought I would go ahead and just offer my 2 cents because it's important. It's important that you, some stranger who might still be watching this, hears me, some person who you don't know and who is unknowable, has his opinion. Now I'm just kind of talking and not really getting to the point. So I did write down some points that I wanted to get to regarding this state of being where young people today are not reading. Now, first things first, I'm going to go out of order with the points that I have written here. So if you see me looking over, that is because I'm just looking at what I wrote yesterday. And because I don't make videos very often, I want to just sort of make a video and kind of get some of my thoughts, my own opinion on this matter kind of spoken of. Get it out of my system, so to speak, and to get back to making videos because I don't really make videos very often. Point number 2 that I had here, basically, no one's ever been reading anyway. I was in college 15, 20 years ago, and most of the kids, I was in a history major, actually education major for history, and so there was a lot of reading assigned in my courses, and usually 5-6 books per history class, and it was expected that you would read the entire thing. Now, there was back then a whole other generation, 2 generations ago, well, 1 generation ago, older millennials, nobody was doing the reading anyway. Most kids bragged about not doing the reading and still passing, still just guessing on the tests and on the essays. Nobody did any extra reading. I was one of the very few students who actually seemed to read the entirety of a text that was required for class. And I would go out of my way and look for other books to read, which, is not a big surprise if you are here and reading a channel called Reading Adam. I was somebody who enjoyed reading. I wanted more books to be assigned, but that was me. So first of all, this is not a new phenomenon where I think kids are maybe just more vocal about the fact that they're not, why are you expecting me to read a book for class? That could be a newer phenomenon, that kids are more open about talking about their feelings and their needs, whereas back in my generation, back in the day, people would hide that from, I'm just going to star this so I know that I spoke about on this point that I made. And basically, kids hid it from the teachers, the professors. It wasn't something that, you would tell other students, but you wouldn't tell the professor that, I don't want to do the reading. You wouldn't be like that. Kids just ignored the reading. They just didn't do the reading. So one of the other points that I had is the value of reading has gone down. So sites like Twitter and Reddit, they offer more value to reading or of reading to people, because a lot of what it's about is stuff that people are actually interested in and interested in now and today. So people are something from a book or a classic that's old, and it's probably not worthwhile to a young person in a rational sense from their own perspective to not read it, to not bother with it, to understand that it's not really something that they are going to get anything out of. And for the most part, I would agree with them. I would not disagree with them. I do think that sites like Twitter and Reddit do often offer superior reading experiences to kids that they wouldn't get from reading literature, especially literature that they just don't understand the language. Maybe they do struggle with the reading comprehension. I don't know if it is a reading comprehension problem, probably for some people, but it can't be that way for everybody. Especially if somebody's in college. I know there has been like a gradeflation and more people who probably are not technically qualified, maybe even theoretically qualified to pursue college degrees are there. But for the most part, the value of reading books in particular has decreased. Everybody is reading all the time off their phones. You know, the social media does actually offer, dare I say, and this is point number 4 that I wrote here, dare we admit that social media is a superior form of communication to books. So books, yes, they have their strong points. I don't want to spend too much time arguing the facts there, that books are a great way to store information for many years. They can't be altered and adjusted all the time. There's less censorship, that kind of stuff. I don't want to really get into that. But social media is a superior form of communication and passing along information, at least in the sense that young people might see as more valuable. For instance, I could just read a post that somebody has posted on, say, Reddit or Twitter, and other people can fact check it, they can correct it, they can argue it. You're kind of getting the opinion of your peers. So it's sort of like a public forum where you can get many different opinions, maybe even find additional information. You can ask people questions. You can interact with the text, essentially. So although it's not as straightforward as a book, it's still, there's corrections being taking place live, so to speak, you know, and although there is censorship, although there are poor or bad moderators, although there are a lot of issues with the medium, and every time you see me looking over, I'm just looking at my notes because I would rather provide you with a steady stream of relevant information than deciding, do I look at my camera or not, because I'm not very practiced at that. But you can find out so many things on social media that the young person, like if they have a question and they can't go to their parents anymore to ask the question, or maybe they don't feel comfortable asking the question, they ask their peers on social media. And their peers is just, by peer, I don't mean anyone around their age, I mean just literally any other human being that speaks the same language. So, and because a lot of people who are adults tend to take the time to provide answers and communicate on the social media, then that is something that could be more valuable. Back in the day, you had to go to a library to discover the answer to a question that you might have had. You might have to consult an encyclopedia. You might have to dig through a dictionary. You might be stuck with just your textbooks from class, like a math textbook, to, okay, just read this over and over, look at this single problem set over and over and try to figure it out. As opposed to nowadays with the internet, you have theoretically infinite amount of information that you can access. So I think we do need to admit that there is something about the way that information is passed along on social media where, yes, to a young person today, a book could be kind of weird. Like, you mean you're giving me this thing that is not updated, can't be updated, it had to have to be completely reprinted. So maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Or it's just a story about people from long ago, and maybe it's not that interesting or even relevant anymore. Case in point, briefly, I will discuss this book that I read recently called Main Traveled Roads, and that's by Hamlin Garland. It's a book, a novel, kind of an anthology, a bunch of little short stories about the Midwest, particularly the Dakotas, and taking place in the late 1800s. So just basically a bunch of little stories about the farmers and the people out that way. And essentially, just by reading it, it was just kind of people. It was, there wasn't much there, I should say. You had people and their relationship. I mean, the author was describing people and their relationships with each other, and at a fairly, what I would say, basic level, meaning a non-modern level of where our relationships today can be. You can have relationships with people you've never even been around in physical person with. We have, back then there weren't even celebrities or people that were particularly well known. You just knew the people who were in your immediate vicinity, and the big dream of like the young woman back then was marrying a Yankee instead of being stuck with a German descended farmer out in the Dakotas. That was one of the themes in this novel. So, or a collection of short stories, I should say. Essentially, a young person reading that book, they might see some parallels between, oh yeah, people back then, they were just interested in having relationships and making money and having a living, and not being poor and not being overworked. So that's okay, that's all relatable, but it kind of ends there, where the rest of it is not, there isn't too much there, and it's not anything that people could just get from stuff today in the modern day. So with some literature, it's just descriptive of life back then, and I think there's just so much that can be done there. Okay, I don't want to belabor that point, so I'm going to move to my next point, just to kind of keep things going along here. I don't want to take too much of your time. I don't want this to be like an hour-long video, for my sake, not yours. So let's go back up. I talked about the value of reading. I'm just looking through my notes here because this is the only way I can make this video higher quality on a single recording instead of re-recording this over and over. So point 1A, reading lacks value. So this is related to my point about the value of reading gone down. Reading lacks value in today's political and economic climate, I believe. That's my opinion. Reading lacks value in today's... Because reading was always a bit of a luxury for the mass, not for the masses, it was a luxury to the masses, but reading was always kind of a luxury reserved for the elite class, for the people who were rulers of society, and for many centuries there wasn't even much available to them. So it wasn't really until the printing press came out, late 1400s, and even then a lot of the stuff that was printed was religious I won't fight to think of I guess in its context. After, I guess this maybe had kind of led to the Enlightenment period, where reading became more in vogue. It was a source of becoming more enlightened. By the time of the American Civil War, Lincoln had read, that's when Lincoln was a bit younger, he was more about... what I'm trying to say is self-help stuff started to come out. The man of progress, the man who can improve his own life by focusing on his tasks at hand, his work. So around the Civil War, you probably had the apogee of literacy. And you can tell this by the letters written by soldiers who were involved in the Civil War, and you can tell that their degree of literacy was pretty high. Reading seemed actually, it seemed to reach its apogee right before, I would say, radio, around the time when Henry James was releasing his masterpieces, his greatest novels, early 1900s. This is the time of Joyce, James Joyce, Proust, and some of the other novelists. I think Virginia Woolf is considered among them. But kind of the most dense, most difficult novels, literature available to man kind of came out in this period, and that became less and less afterward. So nowadays, where most people are struggling to pay their bills, find a place to live, get a decent job, reading is kind of taking a back seat to that. So in the academic realm, it doesn't surprise me if kids are not too interested in reading books, literature and stuff, unless they want to read about people who were struggling and poor and what life was like before the West became super wealthy. Maybe they want to get a kind of heads up in what that's going to be like coming again for them. But other than that, I would think our current economic environment where people are just struggling to get good jobs, keep them and keeping their head above water. Reading it is becoming more and more of a luxury, specifically older stuff. Newer forms of reading, like I mentioned with social media, that stuff is still relevant to people today who are experiencing relationships, experiencing looking for work, experiencing advancing their careers, or debating current politics, all that kind of thing. So I guess another point in relation to this point is how can reading benefit somebody today? Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip. See my mug there. I'm sure you all are interested in that. But how is the juice worth the squeeze for reading books today? I mean, now I've read a lot of books. This is a reading channel. I try to glean some kind of value from books when I read them. Sometimes I read books because I just feel like reading, and sometimes I read books because I want it to enhance or help me or enrich me in some way. And now a lot of young people, they haven't had time to read enough to understand if they're going to get anything out of their reading or not. But sometimes is the juice worth the squeeze? Because I remember reading a history of my local city when I was at college and I was doing a teacher practicum, and I had explained to this class how much drinking was a problem in the 1800s based off of this one book that I was reading, a scholarly monograph, and I was talking about the kind of the temperance movement and sort of what led up to that. What kind of problems were there with the temperance movement before Prohibition? Where did it come from? How did it start becoming a problem, etc.? And my master teacher was like, well, I don't know about that, like referring to people drinking in an excessive amount from the past. And then in my mind, I kind of thought like, well, what's the point of reading scholarly books if you say something that you learned from the book that you really hope is well researched? And when I poked through that book and I looked at the notes, the index, I tried to recapture that knowledge and, look into the source, that kind of thing. And it was based off of what was happening. I mean, the author based it off of what was happening in the newspapers. Newspapers before a certain period of time were not talking about open levels of drunkenness. They weren't concerned with the amount of drinking. And then a certain period had passed, and then suddenly this newspaper that he was examining was almost exclusively talking about like the alcoholism of the day. They didn't have the word alcoholism back then, but the amount of drinking. And so I thought, well, I mean, what's the point if somebody can just kind of dismiss you? And somebody who should be kind of open and be like, oh, that's interesting. Where did you hear that from? Maybe I'll use that in my class, or we'll look into it together to see if this is really a historical fact. If you're making a mistake, I don't want you telling kids stuff that isn't true. But instead he was just like, I don't know about that. And it's that's what I mean by the juice is not worth the squeeze. Let's say you are the student who does a lot of reading. Let's say like me, you're the student who takes the time to do the reading in class, and then other students who also pass the class with the same grade as you, maybe because of gradeflation or whatever, grading on a curve, that kind of stuff. Those kids, they don't read the books, and they just kind of fly by the seat of their pants, and they just sort of make things up as they go. It's kind of like, is it really worth the effort to do the reading when you know others are not doing the reading and nobody's really being very rigorous I guess would be the word. There's a lack of rigor. First off, if you need people to just be able to read in the first place, but then you don't have rigor added to that, because by the time of college, reading should be expected, and now there should be a higher degree of rigor added to that. But I remember in college, a lot of kids being like, what do we study? How do I study a novel? How do I study a textbook where I don't know what's going to be on the test? And the teacher didn't offer any kind of, he was a very good professor, but he didn't offer any sort of path or information to help the students properly understand what they're reading in the way that he constructed tests to kind of give them a heads up, like this is kind of what you should look for. Probably because those kids didn't have an idea of how to understand a work, but they did they're still on the level of just kind of memorizing facts ahead of time, so they can kind of binge memorize right before cram before the test, that kind of thing. So I want to move on to another point here, just because got to keep this moving, and I don't want to belabor my points too much. They can't be that fascinating, are they? I don't know. Maybe they are. Okay, so regarding college classes, and this is point 2A related to point 2, which is that's the point that I did first, which is nobody's reading anyway. There's no effort to adapt to the natural increase in illiteracy. Illiteracy is when people can read, but they don't read. So I find it interesting that maybe there is, so I am kind of talking off the cuff here a little bit, but there's still not any class that I know of dedicated to achieving the most value from your smartphone, or how to combat phone addiction, because we all know phones are a huge problem regarding this, with people's attention spans and what sort of information they have access to. There's a lot of like remedial reading classes in college. There's access to resources where they kind of try to help you learn how to study better, that kind of thing. But I don't know if there's anything dedicated to specifically to how should you use a smartphone? What is the philosophical teleology of smartphones? Which is essentially, what purpose do they serve in society? Every person is essentially assumed to have one. So assuming that most people these days do have access to a smartphone, and then assuming that smartphones have some kind of use, some kind of purpose, now what do we do with that? What should be done with that? What could be argued? How can we get young people to at least get the most value from the technology they have access to? So, because there's no strategy whatsoever, there's no explanation for what purpose they serve given to kids from the perspective of those who have studied it and have figured it out. We just assume we know, because phones are great at communicating with each other, and they're clearly dominant in society to full-length books. Most people, they're going to be far more familiar with a phone than they are books these days. And so just because of that, I'm thinking there's a big gap in knowledge and effort here, because if we can address smartphones as they are, and then can also address addiction to them, because they're highly addictive, then maybe we can make some more effort toward reading books, full-length books, in an academic setting and post-academic setting, where most people, once they finish college, once they finish high school, they don't ever want to read a book again, and they succeed in that. It's very easy to succeed with that effort. So I do think there's this increase in illiteracy, and society is not trying to figure out how to adapt to it, and they're just kind of being like, no, that's wrong, that's bad. people are dumb. People should just read books because books good for you. And it's like, well, why are they better for you than smartphones? But hey, let's just assume we lost that battle. Let's assume kids for the next 50 years are not going to be able to read books because their brains have been grown on smartphones and tablets and such things. So now we have to adapt. Now we have to figure out another way or some kind of competing way. So that's just kind of my point there. Now is not a time for me to just wing it and construct that course for you all right now. I think I have one more point. No, I've got a few more points. So there's another point that I call my Ambrose Bierce point. Ambrose Bierce was a short story writer. And one thing that I wanted to add with this is, so Ambrose Bierce wrote what's called the Devil's Dictionary. He basically wrote his own dictionary, and it's got a lot of humor. It's great. So for his definition of a novel, it's a noun. It's, to him, a short story padded. As it is too long to be read at a sitting, the impressions made by its successive parts are successively effaced, which means erased. So how do you deal with this? Most books, and I think this is an issue that I read on Reddit with people where they just weren't able to comprehend what they were reading. It was too long. It was too difficult for them to comprehend strings of sentences together. Many books really are too long, nonfiction as well as fiction. People don't have the same level of nothing else to do, nothing elseness as people used to have. So people in the past, they had a lot more of nothing else to do. If you read Main Traveled Roads by Hamlin Garland, you will understand this. You will get the fact that, yeah, people really didn't have, you worked and then you had people to interact with. Like, there wasn't much else to do. Whereas nowadays, there's so many things one could do that it's no... Who wants to take part in something that you have to dedicate half a work week to? Reading a longish novel could take 20 hours, 15, 20 hours, especially depending on how much you want to get out of it. If you're not trying to speed read it just to be somebody who has read lots of books. So how do we deal with this nothing elseness that, people used to have a lot of nothing else going on? I looked up for some strategies for reading comprehension for someone with ADHD. And the first thing was an exercise to improve overall focus. Great, let's have a class that's just meditation. Just have a class where kids sit and they do nothing. Okay? And they just focus on one thing. Or they have their eyes closed and and they're just doing nothing. Meditation. Why can't there be a class on that? Just teaching kids, hey, you can focus. We already know you can focus on a single thing. Like, you watch shows, you play video games. We already know you're capable of focus. Theoretically, all humans are capable of focus. So let's practice that. And if kids can sit for a while, not little kids, but like teenagers and young adults, if they can sit for a while doing nothing, then it might become agreeable to them to sit and read a book. Anyway, that's my Ambrose Bierce point, basically, that he obviously didn't like novels. He preferred the short story. He felt like a novel. There's no reason for you to write something very long to get your point across or to make something entertaining. Kind of like a TV show. Each episode really you don't need like 3-4 hour long episodes. Half an hour is typically plenty to get what you need done. My other points are actually fairly short. Just the nowness of information. We are addicted to that. So novelty and nowness or present day information is something that people, I think, get overused to. So they sort of don't, maybe they need to be taught the power of older information and why older books might still be useful or handy. So maybe there's a lack of proper teaching in that area. And then just kind of my last point here is it possible that storytelling is better through TV shows and movies than through literature? Is it possible that, the anime, the cartoon, is a better form of medium? I mean, literature theoretically shouldn't be worse because an author has command of the entire human language, of whatever language they're writing in. They have the command of the whole language. They can access the dictionary. But however, I don't know if they should. Some books like Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, he obviously used the dictionary to great extent, the Oxford English Dictionary, for that book, and I didn't think it actually added to the story at all. After a while, I started to just skip over words that were clearly just words that were extremely rare and probably only ever used in his novel in the last 100 years. So I kind of got tired of it after a while. So although theoretically literature shouldn't be worse, it's a single person working on a story. As long as they can keep it all in their head, they can take as long as they want to make a point. That's the one nice thing about books, is you have theoretically infinite amount of time to write down your idea. Whereas me talking to you right now, I'm just kind of coming up with it as I talk. But if I wrote an essay on this, I could write it and then I could revise it and then I could revise it and revise it and revise it. And maybe even gain new information and during my revisions and perhaps even completely rewrite it. That's always a possibility. But really, is Breaking Bad any worse than a Charles Dickens novel? I mean, is it? I think a lot of people might enjoy Breaking Bad much better than they enjoy Great Expectations or Tale of Two Cities. Those are my favorite Dickens novels, but I still think I enjoyed Breaking Bad better, even though I'm a reading channel person. I'm supposed to be this reader, and I am, but I also prefer, I also really like a lot of fiction that's done through other mediums. I recently watched this show called, what was it called? I'm looking it up here. A science fiction show on Netflix. Just give me a moment here. Man, oh man, I'm drawing a blank. I really want to tell you it because it's good. And it's recent. And in order for me to make my point, you need to know this. Let's see, it was about scavengers. Scavenger's Reign. Okay, that was trust me, it was worth the time for me to figure that out. Scavenger's Reign is a science fiction cartoon series on Netflix for adults, and it's got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, 8.6 out of 10 on IMDb. But basically, that show is, to not give spoilers, but it takes place on an alien planet, and it's so well done that it's you really feel like you're watching an alien planet. It's very creative, very interesting, not something that you can replicate in a book very easily. I've read a lot of science fiction books, and usually they can't or shouldn't create completely unknown, without a reference, alien stuff. So like if there's a squirrel on the planet, it's kind of lame to make it an alien squirrel that's basically a serpent squirrel that also lives in these alien like trees that are slightly different from trees on Earth. You typically don't want to throw too much of that at your audience in a science fiction book just because it's too difficult for them to kind of follow along and figure out what the heck you're talking about. Especially you only have so much language. Whereas in a show like Scavenger Reign, they can show all sorts of aliens that are very different from anything you'd find on Earth, and it's just cool. It just works. It's interesting. It adds to the element. The environment itself becomes a major point of the story. So I guess I kind of wanted to end with that point. We're not addressing enough how much novels and books are really not quite useful to kids anymore, and not in the same extent, perhaps, that they used to be. We need to address the fact that maybe kids are not used to or being flabbergasted at needing to read a book. It more has to do with their focus, their level of focus, than it does the value of the text. I searched for a long time trying to figure out why should I read the classics. I read Italo Calvino's book, Why Read the Classics, and most of what he wrote didn't make... I honestly, I read that book maybe 15 years ago. I can't remember a thing from it except that I remember it being kind of disappointing and didn't really answer my question. Because at the time I was really trying to get myself to read the classics. I really wanted to educate myself through reading the classics. And I'm not talking just like Roman and Greek classics, but I'm also talking about just any book that is considered timeless. And why is it considered timeless? What is it really about? But then you kind of have to find studies about each individual book. And before you know it, you're spending a ton of time just doing something that maybe I don't really need to or want to spend that much time on it. Maybe after a while I realize there's a point of diminishing returns in trying to force myself to be more educated by reading the classics. And I've read just about all the classics. And I can't say that college kids necessarily, and I'm just picking on the classics here, I don't know if it's beneficial for them to read them. I read 1984 in college. No, it was in high school. I tried to read it, and I just didn't understand it. I didn't care for it. And then I reread 1984 in my 30s, and it was like one of the best novels I ever read. A lot of it seemed to apply a lot more to me. So I think a lot of classics, they require a degree of life experience in order to really gain the most from that particular text. So when I read Madame Bovary, it was something that kind of affected me because of my life experience and where I was at in life. I could identify with the young doctor man who was the husband of Madame Bovary. I could identify with him kind of at that time. It was in alignment with stuff that was going on in my own life. So that made that book absolutely incredible to me, where if I had read it in college, I might not have cared at all about it. And even the form and the style might not have mattered. So I'm almost at 40 minutes here. I think I'm going to cut it here. I got my main points across that I didn't hear other people talk about who also have channels and make videos that address this sort of thing. So hopefully those points kind of offer some more information from my perspective on this whole thing about kids not reading anymore, why everyone stopped reading books. Hopefully we will, as a society, figure something out. But really, like, if you want an advantage over others, I guess it's as simple as just actually reading books. And although I don't know how much certain books, I think you, more than ever, you have to be very, very, maybe even spend more time figuring out what books to read before you just start reading books. Some classics, maybe do some digging about why should I read Dickens? What is it about Dickens that made him so popular, such a classic author? That didn't he drop off the face of the earth, and then other authors kind of brought him back to life, back to light? That happens, and I guess digging more into the why should I read, and trying to answer that question for yourself. Because as of right now, how I feel about books personally right now, I feel like it's more worth someone's time to spend time reading science textbooks, mathematics textbooks, in any kind of textbook or papers, scientific papers, anything that's related to their field of study, their potential career, or just learning more about the world around them at the highest level of human understanding. I feel like right now, I think that is a better use of one's time than reading the classics or pieces of literature that might be interesting, might be somewhat valuable and useful, but I think you're going to have a hard time arguing why it's more valuable for somebody to read, Mark Twain than it is to read just what's on the front page of Reddit today, about politics and the economy and just all of the other things that maybe they like a lot more. I don't know. Tell me your thoughts on that. But now I'm starting to get long-winded. I'd like to finish now. So I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.